So this morning I was reading a Time magazine article that looks like it was published on June 29th by some journalist named Eliana Dochterman, which is called "We're re-examining how we portray cops on screen. Now it's time to talk about superheroes." And in this article, which isn't very long, you can read it in just 15 minutes or so online. Does anybody even read physical magazines anymore? She proposes the absolutely ridiculous idea that superheroes are just glorified cops. They're basically the same thing. Superheroes fight crime, as everybody knows. They're all about law and order. Sounds like cops. No. No, this woman has not done her research and doesn't know fuck all about superheroes. I've written 3 books about superheroes. Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons was the first of those. Giant Humans, Tiny Worlds was a book that I've written about graphic novels. And the third book, Gods and Heroes of the Media Age. All 3 of those books are about superheroes. I've done my homework, so I know what I'm talking about. This woman is an idiot. First of all, she says that superheroes they're basically glorified cops. They're mostly the creations of white guys. She fails to mention that a lot of those white guys are Jewish, but apparently that kind of diversity doesn't count in this issue. But as a matter of fact, initially I thought that. Of course, I thought that growing up, that superheroes are crime fighters. But the fact of the matter is, when you go back and you look at it, there's 1,001 reasons to demarcate the superhero from the cop as 2 totally separate species. Now, this gets into the issue of cultural immune systems. The cop is sort of a social immune cell. His job is to defend society from anarchy. So he only exists on the physical plane, on the social, physical plane. And Foucault, I believe, mentioned that in one of his lectures that cops originated back in Europe, the police force originated back in Europe, I think he said 16th or 17th century, as a means for putting checks on flows going through cities. Cities are sort of machines for stepping down the impacts from what Paul Virilio calls the dromosphere. And the dromosphere is pretty much once the foot leaves the ground on an animal or a wheeled conveyance, you're in the dromosphere. That's the realm of nomadology. The city is designed as a striated space to counter what Deleuze and Guattari call the smooth space of the nomad. And the nomad impacts the city. Once the nomad goes into the city with his goods, let's say he's a merchant with a donkey full of goods, he has to go into that city, and the police have to check and verify him. The police step down the flow of the dromosphere so that it's safe, because now you're in the realm of pedestrians. It's a different world inside the city as opposed to the smooth, planar surfaces of the deserts of Arabia, let's say, where the nomads come from, or the steppe in the north in Europe. So, now superheroes, on the other hand, sort of emerge gradually. They start first really in pulp fiction. Pulp fiction in the early part of the 20th century, 1912-ish, with Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan. He's one of the first, along with Zorro, who also appears at about the same time, shortly thereafter. And then Robert E. Howard in the 1930s with his wonderful Conan the Barbarian stories, more superhero stuff. It takes a while for the superhero to get going. Comics have already been up and running since the end of the 19th century, where they originated as political satire. By the time you get to the comic book in the middle of the 1930s, the comic book becomes a separate entity from the comic strip, the Sunday comic strip, or the daily comic strip. I think the dailies were in black and white and the Sundays were in color. Where the superhero first emerges in 1929 with Flash Gordon, and again Tarzan comes in. These are really the first 2 truly superhero adventure heroes, as opposed to like Crazy Cat or Little Nemo or funny characters like that. They're called comics for a reason. They originated out of the realm of humor. But then they gradually shade off into the realm of adventure now. People hardly ever read comics anymore for humor. It's almost entirely stories and tales and narratives and and ventures and so forth. The Phantom comes along as another comic strip in the 1930s. And meanwhile, in the world of pulp fiction and radio, The Shadow, Grant Maxwell's character, is a crime fighter, garbed significantly in such a way that you cannot see his face except for his eyes. He's got a hat, wears black. All you can see are his eyes, and you hear the echo of his laughter, just like the radio acoustic tribal cavern, which retrieves the world of the acoustic cavern. So that's The Shadow, The Phantom. Then we get, along about 33, 34, 35, somewhere in there, the comic book is invented, still primarily as a place for funnies, until we get then to Siegel and Schuster's creation in 1934 of Superman, where they originated the idea, based on Philip Wiley's novel Gladiator, which is pretty much a transformation into pulp fiction and popular culture of the myth of the strongman, Hercules, who in turn, the Greek character Hercules, is a Greek transformation and echo of the Sumerian character Gilgamesh, the great strong man who defends the city of Uruk from these monsters that attack it, like the giant bull that is sent by Inanna to attack the city. He defends the city. That's significant here. So now we're getting somewhere with this archaeology. Way back behind here, one of the first truly superhero super characters that appear in comic books, with Superman, who appears in Action Comics #1 in 1938, and then the following year, 1939, Batman appears in Detective Comics #27, 1939, and that same year, 1939, Marvel Comics #1 gets up and running with two characters, the Submariner and the Human Torch. The Submariner is, of course, a transformation of the Greek god Neptune, so he has been taken from that sign regime, what Deleuze and Guattari call a sign regime. So he's been taken from that sign regime. The Human Torch is simply a personification of one of the four elements, as though it were a human being. We're a long ways away from fighting crime here. The first issue of Marvel Comics #1 is about the battle between the Submariner and the Human Torch over Manhattan, for over possession of Manhattan. The Submariner is threatening to drown the city with a flood, and the Human Torch wants to dry it out and chase him away. Batman now. Okay, so let's take a look at Superman and Batman for a second, because the two are quite different. Superman, of course, comes from another world. He is a transformation of Gilgamesh, Samson, Hercules. So he comes out of the European sign regime. But initially, and few people know this, if you read the first 10 or 15 issues or so of Superman, as I did way back, both the Superman comic book as well as the Action Comics that he appeared in, he was primarily created by Siegel and Schuster during the Depression as a character for smashing up the city. He uses his strength. He's basically a Luddite. He's smashing up trains. He's smashing up publishing industries, smashing up everything. And it's significant that his first villains that he fights are mad scientists. Lex Luthor, the Ultra-Humanite, these types of guys. They're all mad scientists, and so they personify science and technology. And Superman, in origin, is totally in opposition to the world of big business on the one hand, which these men see as having caused the Great Depression and corrupted the world for the little guy. So he's on behalf of the little guy against the corporations and big business, as well as rationalism and the realm of the sciences. Batman, on the other hand, is the sort of god of the machine. He's a Faustian figure fused together now, for the first time, with a Native American character out of ancient Native American myth. And Batman is really the first here to begin showing Native American myth characters surfacing up through the crust of the surface of the European Anglo world that has been created in New York City. And now the gods of the land, and this is a principle in mythology, the gods of the land that were there first and the longest are the ones who eventually surface within the sign regimes of the newcomers who come in bringing alien sign regimes into a landscape which gradually then becomes subverted and fused together with the sign regime of the landscape. All these characters, not all of them, but a bunch of them, Batman, Wolverine, Spider-Man, Black Widow, Ant-Man, Wasp, these are all Native American myth figures. All of them. Batman was the Batman god, as he was referred to, was worshipped in all kinds of Native American cultures. You can pull up a jadeite image from the site of Monte Alban. You'll pull it up, and there it is. It looks exactly like Batman. Spitting image. And I doubt Siegel and Schuster were familiar with this at all. I'm sure they knew nothing about it. It's a mysterious process that's called acculturation. The incoming process is known as landnama, which is a Scandinavian word, landnama, where the incoming sign regime says, oh, the character Quetzalcoatl that you see crucified is now Christ. We're renaming it. We're claiming it and naming it. The three trees over on the hill that you have names for, those are now the new Golgotha, or whatever. They just overcode a landscape. This is land naming and claiming. But meanwhile, the acculturation process that comes up from below takes a lot longer to happen. But it gradually just absorbs into the consciousness of the incomers, and pretty soon they're writing comic books with Native American characters in them. So Batman is a fusion then, getting back to Batman, is a fusion of this Faustian priest of the machine. He's always inventing gadgets, totally the opposite to Superman, always inventing gadgets. And his primary characters, villains, like the Joker, created by Bill Finger, not Bob Kane. Bill Finger created the whole pantheon of characters, especially the Joker and Catwoman and the Penguin. These characters are not... these characters are all personifications of ancient figures out of ancient myth. They represent the mythic, what Gene Gebser called the mythic consciousness structure that the superhero is designed to keep out of the rational consciousness structure of Manhattan. Manhattan is a place, it's an end phase world city governed by high intellect, ruled by secular finance. The Dutch created it as a place of just come in and compete. We don't care what your gods are, what your religion is. But nonetheless, here is its religion. These superheroes come into being from out of the imaginations of these guys, totally naively. They don't know anything about these kinds of mysterious cultural processes. And pretty soon, all these superheroes are fighting to keep the gods of the ancient mythical world from infecting the rational consciousness structure of Manhattan. And Batman is nothing if not a rationalist. The Joker represents a man of riddles who upsets his order of rationalism. The Joker is a French deconstructionist in disguise. He loves upsetting the streamlined system of New York that Batman wants to keep running. And that's their struggle. That's the primary two characters in their struggle. But the Joker is, of course, an ancient character out of myths who goes all the way back to Harlequin. And characters like that, the white painted face is always an indication that you're dealing with a dead ancestor, a shade, as tribal peoples paint their faces white to represent dead ancestors. So this has nothing to do with fighting crime here. Spider-Man number 2 is a case in point. Spider-Man comes into being in the late 60s. Number 2, where he fights Vulture Man. And Vulture Man is this guy who can fly. He has a human head, he's bald, and he has these green wings that enable him to fly. He lives in a farmhouse on Staten Island, and he flies into New York to trouble Spider-Man. Spider-Man fights him, defeats him, and sends him off to jail, packing via police helicopter. Puts him in a helicopter. The Vulture Man is an ancient image of the soul. The Ba in ancient Egypt was precisely pictured exactly the same way, a human head with the wings of a bird. And of course, Spider-Man is a huge character out of Native American myth, particularly Southwestern Native American myth, where it was mostly Spider-Woman. There was a Spider-Man, but he was relatively rare by comparison to the ubiquity of Spider-Woman. But nonetheless, he fights the Vulture. This is clearly a war of two different consciousness structures. The rational consciousness structure of Manhattan, keeping the mythical, the realm of superstition. There's no such thing as a pious New Yorker. Just as there's no such thing as an atheist countryside or rural person. It doesn't work that way. And so that's what's going on in these myths, are these struggles for these consciousness structures and these different sign regimes that have been fused together. The European brings over characters like Scandinavian characters like Loki and Thor. And Thor is interesting. He's a case in point because Thor in Scandinavian myth functioned as the immune system for Valhalla and for the Scandinavian culture. His job was to use his hammer as a thunderbolt for killing giants. And the giants were the monsters that his job specifically was to keep out. It wasn't about law and order. Superheroes aren't interested in giving people traffic tickets. That's not what they do. They are the metaphysical immune system of New York City. That's what superheroes are, based on a fusion of two different sign regimes, the Native American sign regime and its ancient myths, with the European sign regime with its ancient myths, the Scandinavian myths, and behind that the Greek myths, and even behind that echoes from ancient Sumer. That's what superheroes are. So don't let this idiot, whatever her name is, Eliana Doctorman, try to get away with telling you that superheroes are glorified cops. They most certainly are not.